The sergeant snatched the sealed federal document from her hands and tore it in half. Right there. In the middle of a crowded police station, in front of 30 witnesses, he ripped it apart and let the pieces fall to the floor like garbage. Emma Caldwell didn't flinch. She stood in her plain blue nursing uniform, hands at her sides, and watched him. The room went quiet. In that particular way rooms go quiet when something is about to go very wrong. "You're a nurse," he said, the word dripping with contempt. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pressed a single button. Every door in the building locked simultaneously. If this story already has you hooked, stay with me until the very end. Hit like, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning had started ordinary enough, which was the thing about bad days. They rarely announced themselves. Emma Caldwell left her apartment at 6:43, the same time she always left, carrying a travel mug that had gone cold somewhere between the parking garage and the crosswalk on 5th and Marin. Redwood Valley was already awake by then, the way mid-sized cities are always half awake before 7. Delivery trucks idling at loading docks, a woman walking a dog that clearly didn't want to be walked, the smell of a bakery vent pushing warm air into the cold November street. She wore her blue nursing scrubs under a gray fleece. Her ID badge from Crestline Medical Center hung on a lanyard that had seen better days. She looked, in every measurable way, like a 29-year-old ER nurse on her way to a shift. That was the point. She stopped at the corner across from Redwood Valley Police Headquarters and looked at the building for a moment longer than a person just passing by would look. It was a blunt, bureaucratic structure. 3 stories of beige concrete and narrow windows, an American flag out front that needed replacing, a handful of cruisers in the lot. Nothing that suggested anything worth worrying about, which was exactly how places like this survived as long as they did. She crossed the street. The woman at the front desk was somewhere in her 50s, reading something on her phone, and she didn't look up when Emma came through the glass doors. The lobby smelled like industrial cleaner and burned coffee. A row of plastic chairs lined one wall, most of them empty. A small television mounted near the ceiling showed a morning news program on mute. "Excuse me," Emma said. The woman looked up. Her name tag said Patricia. "I have a delivery for Sergeant Hale," Emma said. "I need to hand it to him directly." Patricia studied her. The scrubs, the lanyard, the travel mug. "You're a nurse?" "I work at Crestline. The sergeant requested a patient records transfer, federal health documentation. It has to be signed for in person." This was not entirely a lie. It was the kind of sentence that contained just enough truth to be navigable. Patricia's expression moved through mild confusion and landed on mild disinterest. "I'll call back. You can sit." Emma sat. She set her travel mug on the chair beside her and looked at the muted television. A traffic reporter was gesturing at a map. She counted the security cameras. 4 visible, probably 2 she couldn't see from this angle. She noted the door behind the front desk, the hallway beyond it, the stairwell access on the left. She did this the way some people check their phone, automatically, without thinking about it. A few minutes passed. Then a door opened and a uniformed officer came through, moving with the particular energy of someone who was already irritated before the conversation started. Sergeant Victor Hale was in his mid-40s, broad across the shoulders, with a face that had probably been handsome once and had since decided not to bother. He wore his uniform like he was daring someone to comment on it. He looked at Emma the way men like him always looked at women like her. A quick, dismissive scan that concluded nothing worth slowing down for. "You're from the hospital?" he said. "Crestline Medical. Emma Caldwell." She stood and extended the envelope. "Federal patient record transfer per your department's request. I need a signature." He took the envelope but didn't open it. "Why'd they send a nurse?" "I'm the records liaison on this case. It's protocol." He looked at the envelope, then at her, then at the envelope again. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not suspicion exactly, more like the beginning of an idea he didn't want to examine too closely. He tore the envelope open. Emma watched him read. She watched the color change in his face. "What is this?" he said. "It's a federal documentation order, standard form. This is..." He looked up. "This is a notification of federal investigation. This has nothing to do with patient records." "You're right," she said. "It doesn't." The lobby had gotten quiet. Patricia had stopped looking at her phone. A younger officer who'd been filling out paperwork near the far wall had gone still. Hale's jaw tightened. "You lied to get in here." "I told you I had federal documentation to deliver. That was accurate." "You said it was patient records." "I said it was a federal health documentation. The word patient may have been implied." "You're welcome to review the conversation." She said it calmly, not robotically. She wasn't performing calm, she just was calm. The way a person is calm when they've been in situations that make this one look like a minor inconvenience. Hale took a step toward her. "I don't know who you think you are, coming in here with—" He stopped. Then, in a motion that was almost theatrical in its contempt, he grabbed the document with both hands and tore it. Not a small tear. He ripped it completely in half, then let both pieces drop to the floor. The sound of paper tearing in a quiet room is louder than people expect. Emma looked at the pieces on the floor. Then she looked at him. "That was a sealed federal document," she said. "Witness destruction is a separate charge." "You're a nurse," he said, loading the word with everything he intended. "You don't have charges, you don't have authority, you have a badge that lets you take temperatures." "Okay," she said. She reached into her left pocket. To anyone watching, it looked like she was pulling out her phone. And she was but it was a specific phone, one that looked unremarkable and had a specific function. She pressed a single button on the side. For a moment, nothing happened. Then every electronic lock in the building engaged simultaneously. A series of metallic clicks running down the hallways like a row of dominoes falling. The front glass doors sealed. The door behind Patricia's desk sealed. Somewhere down the hall, a man's voice said, "What the—" Patricia stood up from her desk. "What just happened?" Hale spun around. "Who locked the doors?" "Building security protocol," Emma said. "It's automatic, triggered by federal authorization." He turned back to her, and she could see the moment the irritation curdled into something uglier. The particular anger of a man who'd just realized he'd made a mistake without understanding what the mistake was yet. "You need to tell me exactly who you are," he said. "Right now." "I told you. Emma Caldwell." "You're a nurse." "I'm several things," she said. "Right now I'm the person you just destroyed federal documentation in front of." She tilted her head slightly. "You might want to pick those pieces up before anyone else photographs them." He looked at the torn paper on the floor. He looked at her. His hand moved toward his radio. "I wouldn't," she said. "Your communications are currently being logged." That made him go still. Down the hall, voices were rising. The younger officer near the wall had moved to the edge of the room and was watching the exchange with an expression caught somewhere between confusion and the dawning understanding that something had gone significantly sideways. Hale took a step toward her, dropping his voice. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but I will have you removed from this building." "The building is locked," she reminded him. "I will have you arrested." "On what basis?" "Impersonating—" He stopped. "Trespassing." "I came through the front door and identified myself to your desk staff. You'll need a better theory." He stared at her. She could see him trying to find the angle, trying to fit her into a category that made sense, something manageable. The scrubs were throwing him. People in scrubs didn't do things like this. Nurses didn't come into police stations and lock the doors. That was the thing about assumptions. They were load-bearing walls. Knock the right one out, and the whole structure got unstable. "You said federal authorization," he said finally. "You're not federal, you're a nurse." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." A door opened at the far end of the hallway, and Police Chief Marcus Voss walked in, moving with the weight of a man who was accustomed to rooms stopping when he entered them. He was late 60s, gray at the temples, a face built for official photographs. He assessed the lobby in one sweep. The sealed doors, the torn paper on the floor, Emma standing in the middle of it all, and something in his expression closed off like a window being shuttered. "Victor," he said, "what's the situation?" "Sir, this woman—" "I can hear her," Voss said. He looked at Emma. "Miss Caldwell." Emma noticed he already knew her name. She filed that. "Chief Voss," she said, my sergeant says you're from Crestline Medical." "That's one place I work, yes." Voss took a measured breath. "Would you like to tell me what you're actually doing in my building?" "I delivered a federal notification of investigation. Your sergeant destroyed it." She indicated the paper on the floor. "Photographs have already been taken." Voss looked at the torn paper. A muscle moved in his jaw. He looked at Hale with an expression that said, "I will deal with you later," in a language that needed no translation. Then he looked back at her. "You triggered our electronic locks. Federal authorization allows for security holds during notification delivery. It's in the documentation you'll receive separately." "We'll receive it separately," he repeated. His tone was careful now, the tone of a man who was starting to understand that something was wrong but hadn't yet identified exactly what. "Via secure federal channel," Emma said. "Should arrive within the hour." Voss took another breath. "I'm going to ask you to come with me to my office. We'll sort this out quietly." "I'm happy to do that," she said, "though I'd suggest you have your legal counsel present." She said it without any particular emphasis, like a person giving practical advice, not a threat, which made it worse somehow. Voss's jaw tightened and Hale's face went a shade darker, because neither of them quite knew how to respond to a woman in nursing scrubs who suggested they call their lawyer the way a colleague might suggest they get coffee. The thing about Emma Caldwell was that she had learned a long time ago, in circumstances considerably more dangerous than this, that the most powerful thing you could project was calm. Not cold, not aggressive, just steady, unimpressed, present. She had learned it in places that did not appear on tourist maps. She followed Voss down the hallway, past doors that were still locked, past officers who had emerged from offices and were watching her with varying degrees of confusion. Hale fell into step behind her, which she noted without turning around. The back of her neck registered his presence the way a person registers weather. Not alarmed, just aware. Voss's office was what she'd expected. Wood paneling, an American flag in the corner, commendations on the wall in matching frames. A desk too big for the room. He gestured to a chair across from the desk, and she sat, and he sat, and Hale stood near the door with his arms crossed. "You have to understand," Voss began. "You don't need to explain anything to me yet," Emma said. "You haven't been formally notified of the scope. I'm just the delivery." "The delivery," Voss said flatly, "of the notification. The investigation itself is being conducted by a separate team." Hale's arms uncrossed. "What team?" Emma looked at him. "I'm not authorized to provide specifics." "You're a nurse," he said, again, like it was the only word he had. "Victor," Voss said quietly. "She keeps talking about federal authorization like she has any—" "Victor." Hale stopped. The silence had weight. Voss looked at Emma with the expression of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and was accustomed to controlling them. "Let's say I accept that you represent some federal interest. What exactly is this investigation regarding?" "The notification document would have specified," she said. "Unfortunately, it was destroyed." Voss didn't move, but something in his face did. "I'm sure a replacement can be transmitted," Emma continued. "But the original in-person delivery was the required step. That step has now been completed, witnessed, and documented." "Documented," Voss said, "photographically, and by the building's own security system, which is still recording." Voss leaned back in his chair. He was thinking. She could see it, the gears moving behind his eyes. He was a man who had spent decades managing situations, and he was trying to manage this one, and he was having trouble finding the handle. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "I'm going to be direct with you. I don't know what you were told to do here or who told you to do it, but you've walked into a police department, misrepresented your purpose, triggered our security system without authorization, and now you're sitting in my office making implications about investigations without providing a single concrete credential." "That's a reasonable summary," Emma said. "I could arrest you right now." "You could try," she said, not defiantly, just accurately. Voss studied her. "What does that mean?" Before she could answer, the phone on his desk rang. He looked at it. It rang again. He picked it up. "Voss?" Emma watched his face. She watched the color drain out of it the same way it always drained, the same way she'd watched it happen to men in command positions who'd just received news their entire operational framework was built on a fault line. It happened slowly at first, then all at once. He didn't say much. He listened. He said, "Yes, once." He said, "I understand, once." He hung up. The room was very quiet. "Victor," he said, his voice a tone lower than it had been. Hale uncrossed his arms. "What?" "Get Delgado and Morrison. My office. Now." "What's happening?" Boss looked at Emma. There are federal vehicles outside. Hale went to the window. Emma didn't need to look. She knew exactly what was outside, down to the number of vehicles and where they were positioned. She'd helped plan it. How many? Hale said, his voice strange. Enough, Voss said. Hale turned from the window and looked at Emma with an expression she had seen before. Not on officers, but on soldiers. In the moment when a mission goes irrevocably sideways and there's no protocol for what comes next. Pure, unprocessed shock. Who are you? He said. Not the way he'd said it before, loaded with contempt. This time it was a genuine question. Emma stood up from the chair and smoothed the front of her scrubs. I told you, she said. Emma Caldwell. She walked to the window and looked out at the street below. There were 3 tactical vehicles parked at angles across the entrance to the building's lot, black and gray and utterly unmistakable. Officers in federal gear were taking positions with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. A small crowd of civilian bystanders had stopped on the opposite sidewalk, phones out, already recording. Behind her, she heard Hale make a sound that wasn't quite a word. She looked at the commendations on Voss's wall, the framed citations, the letters of appreciation, the photograph from some ceremony where he was shaking hands with a state senator. 23 years of carefully constructed legitimacy arranged in matching frames. She thought about the files she'd spent 4 months assembling, the evidence that existed in multiple secure locations across multiple jurisdictions, in formats that couldn't be shredded or deleted or buried in a filing cabinet. She thought about the names in those files, not officers, not case numbers, but actual people whose lives had been compressed into incident reports that went nowhere and complaints that were never processed. She'd done this kind of work before, in different terrain, with different stakes. The landscape changed. The math didn't. You're going to want to contact your legal counsel, she said again. Both of you. Voss was already reaching for his phone. Hale was still standing at the window, watching the federal vehicles below with an expression that had moved past shock and arrived somewhere Emma recognized as the particular grief of a man watching something he built beginning to come apart. You knew, Hale said, not to her specifically. When you walked in, you already knew all of it. Emma picked up her cold travel mug from where she'd left it on the edge of Voss's desk. She hadn't meant to bring it in here, but she'd been holding it when they walked down the hall, and here it was. The documentation you destroyed, she said, was a courtesy, a legal formality that gave you an opportunity to cooperate voluntarily. She looked at him. You tore it in half and told me I'd take temperatures. Outside there was the sound of radios, orders being given, the mechanical sound of a door at the building's rear being breached, not violently, but with the deliberate efficiency of people who had the codes and the authority to use them. Hale's radio went off. A voice came through, clipped and urgent, reporting that the rear entrance was being accessed by federal personnel with valid authorization. His hand moved toward it reflexively, and then stopped, because there was nothing to say into it that would help him now. Emma set her travel mug down and walked toward the office door. Miss Caldwell? Voss's voice stopped her. She turned. He was sitting very still behind his desk, the phone still in his hand, looking at her with an expression that had stripped away all of the professional management and left something rawer behind it. Not quite fear. Something adjacent to it. What exactly is it that you do? Your actual work. She looked at him for a moment. Right now, she said, I'm a nurse. She opened the office door and walked out into the hallway, and the sound she left behind her was the quiet of a room in which 2 men had just understood, with terrible clarity, that the woman in the blue scrubs had never been the least powerful person in the building. Down the hall, she could hear the federal team moving through the rear access. Clear, professional voices calling room by room. She walked toward them, not hurrying, because there was nothing to hurry toward. Everything was already in motion, had been in motion for months, was running exactly as it was supposed to run. What she did not expect was the door on her left. It opened fast, and a man she hadn't seen before, young, plain clothes, moving with the jerky urgency of someone who'd made a decision in the last 30 seconds, shoved past her hard enough to send her into the opposite wall. She caught herself, turned, saw him running toward the stairwell door at the end of the hall with a laptop bag over his shoulder. She said one word into her radio, quiet and specific, and heard the acknowledgement come back immediately. The stairwell door opened before the man reached it. Two federal agents came through from the other side. The man stopped, laptop bag swinging forward with the momentum of his aborted sprint, and stood in the middle of the hallway between where he was trying to go and where Emma was standing behind him. He turned slowly, looked at her. His name was Danny Rourke, and she knew that because his name was in the files, had been in the files since August, attached to a specific set of data transfers that had occurred between the department's internal server and an external address traced to a private LLC with no legitimate business activity. He was 26 years old, a civilian IT contractor, and he had thought, until approximately this moment, that the worst thing that was going to happen today was a bad commute. "Hey," he said, to her or to the agents or to nobody in particular. The agents moved toward him with the calm efficiency of people completing a task they'd been briefed on. Emma straightened her lanyard, which had twisted in the collision. She watched the agents guide Rourke toward the far wall and heard them begin the standard process. Rights, identification, the formal language of this moment becoming permanent record. Her shoulder ached where she'd hit the wall. She noted it the way she noted most physical discomforts. Present, catalogued, not in charge. She turned and kept walking. The thing about this building, she had learned from the floor plans and the access records and 3 separate accounts from people who'd worked in it, was that the evidence room was on the 2nd floor, north side, accessible by a keycard that 9 people in the department were authorized to use. She'd reviewed the access logs. In the past 6 weeks, 4 of those 9 had swiped in at irregular hours, late evenings, early mornings, the hours people chose when they wanted to work without witnesses. She hadn't told the federal team everything she knew. Not because she was withholding, she'd turned over everything she could document, but some things she knew from sources that didn't sit cleanly in a court filing, from pattern recognition, built over years of reading situations that moved faster than any formal process could track, the kind of knowledge that lived in the body rather than on paper. She walked past the evidence room door. It was already being addressed. She could hear voices on the other side, the systematic process beginning. At the end of the hallway, a window looked out over the parking lot on the east side of the building. She stopped there. Below, more federal vehicles had arrived. The cordon perimeter had expanded. A news van had pulled up at the edge of the blocked-off area, a camera operator setting up on the sidewalk while a reporter spoke into a phone. Word was getting out, which was expected. Word always got out. She looked at her reflection in the window glass. The scrubs, the lanyard, the face she'd been carrying through this day like a neutral mask. She looked tired, which was accurate. She had been tired for a while, not the kind of tired that sleep fixed. Her radio clicked. A voice she recognized. Supervisory Agent Deanna Briscoe, who had been her primary contact for the past 3 months, spoke 2 sentences. Emma pressed the transmit button. "Copy that," she said. "I'm on 2. She turned away from the window. The next hour was going to be loud, procedurally complex, and emotionally exhausting in the specific way institutional accountability was always exhausting. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the hard and incremental work of dismantling something that had been carefully constructed to resist dismantling. She was good at that work. She'd been doing it longer than anyone in this building knew. She started toward the stairwell, and her shoulder ached, and her coffee was cold. And somewhere behind her, the door to Chief Marcus Voss's office opened, and she heard his voice speaking to someone in low, rapid tones that didn't sound like a man in control of the conversation anymore. She kept moving. On the 2nd floor landing, she nearly walked into a federal agent coming the other way. A tall woman in tactical gear who stepped aside and then did a slight double take when she saw Emma's scrubs. "You Caldwell?" the agent said. "Yeah." The agent nodded, not a greeting exactly. More an acknowledgement, the professional recognition of one person whose role in an operation is clear to another. "Briscoe wants you at the server room, north end." "I know where it is," Emma said. She kept walking, and the agent fell into step briefly beside her before peeling off toward a different corridor, and Emma rounded the corner and stopped. The north end server room door was open. Inside, 2 agents were working through a systematic process, and a third was photographing equipment. And on a monitor in the corner, a progress bar was moving slowly through a data extraction process. Standing in the doorway, watching all of this, was Deanna Briscoe. She was 52, compact, with close-cropped gray hair and the unhurried energy of someone who had seen enough of these moments to have stopped treating them as climactic. She looked at Emma and then at Emma's shoulder where the scrubs were slightly torn from the hallway collision. "Rourke?" she said. "Yeah, he's in the hall. He get anything out?" "The bag's with your people." Briscoe nodded. "Server access logs?" "All documented from my end," Emma said, going back to April. Briscoe turned back to the room. "We'll pull everything. Give us 6 hours." "The chief is on his phone. He was calling someone when I left his office." "We're monitoring outgoing communications." Briscoe's mouth did something that was almost a smile. "He can call whoever he wants." Emma looked at the server room. The progress bar moved incrementally. Somewhere in that stack of drives and cables was the operational record of years of decisions. Who flagged what, who buried what, whose reports went in and whose disappeared into procedural limbo. She had spent months working backward through the traces those decisions left, building the map that made this moment possible. "You did good work," Briscoe said, still not looking at her. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was the kind of statement made between two professionals, factual and brief. "There's more they haven't found yet," Emma said. "Voss has a secondary filing system, physical. I believe it's off-site." Briscoe turned to look at her. "You know where?" "I have a strong theory. I'll walk you through it when you're ready." Briscoe studied her for a moment with the particular focus of someone updating an internal assessment. "When did you figure that out?" 3 weeks ago, Emma said. "I wanted to make sure before I said anything." 3 weeks, Briscoe said. "There was a pattern in his mileage reimbursements," Emma said. 14 trips to the same address in the past 2 years, all logged as community liaison visits. No corresponding reports. No event records. Briscoe was quiet for a moment. Then, "You were reviewing their expense reports." "I review everything," Emma said. It was said simply, without pride, because it wasn't pride. It was just how she worked, had always worked. The thorough and methodical attention to detail she'd built out of necessity in environments where missing a detail had consequences more immediate than a court case. Briscoe turned back to the server room. "Write it up. I want it before end of day." "Understood." Emma leaned against the wall in the hallway, outside the server room door. From where she stood, she could see down the corridor toward the stairwell. Agents moving, voices in the contained, purposeful rhythm of an operation unfolding correctly. Somewhere below, Hale and Voss were in the same building with their world coming apart, and somewhere in an access log a data trail was being preserved that would follow them for the rest of their professional lives. She thought about the name on the complaint that had started all of this. A woman named Carla Devers, 41 years old, who had filed a misconduct report 14 months ago and watched it disappear into the department's internal process without resolution. Carla Devers, who had then tried the Civilian Oversight Board and received a form letter, who had then, through a referral from a legal aid organization, found her way to a federal intake channel that most people didn't know existed. Emma had read that intake file on a Tuesday afternoon in the break room at Crestline, eating a sandwich, and something in the specific detail of it, the pattern of how the report had moved and where it had stopped, the particular mechanism of its disappearance, had felt familiar in a way she couldn't leave alone. That was 4 months ago. Now she was leaning against a wall in a police department that was in the process of being taken apart, and her shoulder hurt, and her scrubs had a small tear at the collar, and none of that mattered against the particular steadiness she felt when something was moving in the direction it was supposed to move. Her radio clicked. Briscoe's voice. "We've got a problem on the east stairwell." Emma pushed off the wall and started moving. She didn't know yet what the problem was, but she knew this. Whatever they'd tried to hide, they'd had years to hide it well. And whatever they thought they'd destroyed, the document Hale had torn in half, the files that had gone missing, the evidence that had been buried so deep it barely left an outline, was about to show them that you could not destroy something that existed in more places than you knew. She moved down the hallway, and the federal operation moved around her, and somewhere in the east stairwell something was happening that would shift the shape of the next several hours. She rounded the corner and saw it. Victor Hale was standing at the stairwell door with one hand flat against it, as if he could hold it closed by force of will, and 2 federal agents were calmly explaining to him why that wasn't going to work. And from the way his face had arranged itself, jaw forward, eyes somewhere between furious and frightened, she could see he'd reached the specific moment when a man stops being strategic and starts being reactive. He saw her come around the corner. "You," he said. She stopped. "You set this entire thing up," he said. His voice had stripped away the contempt from earlier. What was left under it was raw and less controlled. "You came in here with that document, that whole... You planned all of this." "Yes," she said. He stared at her. "Why?" It was a different question than the ones he'd been asking. This one was genuine. She looked at him for a moment. "Because 14 months ago, a woman filed a report in this building and it disappeared. And she wasn't the first one." Hale's hand dropped from the door. The agents moved in, unhurried, and the door opened, and the sounds of the stairwell came through. Other agents, movement, the operation continuing on every level simultaneously. "Who are you?" he said again, still the genuine question. She picked up her travel mug from where she'd apparently been carrying it this entire time without realizing it. It was completely cold now, which meant she had been awake for a very long time. "You'll find out," she said. "It'll be in the documentation." She turned and walked toward the east stairwell, because there was still work to do, and the work didn't wait on explanations. But behind her, she heard one of the agents saying Hale's name in a specific tone, the tone that came with specific words she'd heard many times in many places. And she kept walking, because this moment, right here, was not the end of anything. It was the part where everything they'd built to protect themselves began, piece by piece, to fall. The east stairwell smelled like concrete dust and old paint, the kind of smell that buildings accumulate over decades of indifference. Emma took the stairs two at a time, not running, but close to it, because Briscoe didn't call things problems unless they were. She heard it before she saw it. On the landing between the first and second floors, a man was on his knees with his hands behind his head, and two agents standing over him, and that wasn't the problem. That was resolved. The problem was the woman pressed against the far wall, a uniformed officer Emma didn't recognize. Young, maybe 24, with both hands raised and her face doing something complicated between fear and something that wasn't quite defiance but was adjacent to it. "She was trying to get past us," one of the agents said to Emma, which was interesting because Emma wasn't in charge of the agents. But she'd been in enough operations to know what it looked like when someone defaulted to the steadiest-looking person in the room. Emma looked at the officer. Her name tag said RUIZ. Her hands were shaking slightly, which she was trying to control with limited success. "You have somewhere to be?" Emma asked. I was just trying to get downstairs," Ruiz said. There's a witness I'm supposed to be..." "What witness?" Ruiz's mouth closed. She looked at the agents, then back at Emma. "It's a pending case. It's not related to..." "Officer Ruiz," Emma kept her voice level. "This building is under a federal hold. Nobody goes anywhere without clearance right now. That's not a threat. It's a procedure. You understand procedure." Something in Ruiz's face changed, the fear settling into something more manageable. "Yes." "Is the witness in the building?" "No, they're supposed to come in at 10. Emma checked her watch. 8:51. "Give your contact information to Agent..." She glanced at the nearest agent's badge. "Torres. They'll make sure your witness is handled." Ruiz looked at Agent Torres. Torres gave her a short nod. Ruiz lowered her hand slowly, like she was testing whether it was allowed. It was a small thing. But Emma filed it. Filed Ruiz, filed the fact that she'd been in the stairwell, filed the way she'd looked when Emma mentioned the witness. Probably nothing. Possibly something. She continued down to the first floor. The lobby had transformed in the time she'd been upstairs. 2 federal agents now occupied the front desk area, while Patricia sat in one of the plastic chairs against the wall, arms crossed, looking like a woman who had decided that whatever was happening was not her fault, and she wanted that clearly noted. A cluster of uniformed officers stood near the television, still muted, still showing a traffic reporter who had no idea. Most of the officers looked confused. A couple looked sick. Emma moved through without stopping. Outside, the morning had sharpened. November air hit her face and she stopped for a moment just to breathe it, which was something she'd learned years ago to do in the middle of operations. Find the 30 seconds, take them, because the next hour was going to require everything, and you couldn't run on empty indefinitely. Briscoe was near the command vehicle, a black SUV parked at an angle to the building's entrance. She was on a phone, speaking in the clipped shorthand of someone giving an update that was itself an update to a previous update. She saw Emma and held up 2 fingers without breaking the conversation. Emma waited. Around her, the federal perimeter had settled into its operational rhythm. Agents moved with purpose. The news van she'd seen earlier had been joined by another one, both parked at the far edge of the blocked zone, cameras trained on the building. A uniformed Redwood Valley officer stood at the perimeter line, looking like he didn't know which way to face. Briscoe ended the call. "The secondary location," she said. "The address from the mileage reimbursements. I need it now." 1140 Garrison Road, Emma said. "It's a storage facility in the Millhaven district. Unit 37. Voss leased it under a business name, something called Harrow Creek Consulting. The LLC filed no returns. It's a shell." Briscoe was already transmitting the information before Emma finished the sentence. "We'll have eyes on it within the hour. He may have already called ahead. We're monitoring his communications. He might have a secondary phone." Briscoe looked at her. "You think he does?" He used his desk phone to call someone when he realized what was happening. His personal cell was on the desk, and he didn't reach for it. That might be habit. Or it might be that the personal cell isn't the one he uses for things he doesn't want tracked. Briscoe processed this. "You're saying there's a third phone. I'm saying it's worth considering. Why didn't you mention this earlier?" "Because I just thought of it," Emma said. It was honest, and it landed slightly differently than Briscoe expected. The small admission that Emma hadn't thought of everything, had been building the picture in real time like everyone else. Briscoe gave a short nod that was something between acknowledgement and approval. "Stay close," Briscoe said. "I need you visible when we brief the Internal Affairs Unit. They're arriving at 9:30. "Understood." Emma moved away from the command vehicle and found a spot near the building's exterior wall where she could see the perimeter and the entrance simultaneously. She pulled out her personal phone and checked messages. Her shift supervisor at Crestline had texted at 7:50. "You coming in today, or is this the thing you told me about?" She texted back. "The thing." 3 dots appeared, then, "Okay, stay safe." She put the phone away. The thing about the past 4 months was that she'd done most of it alone, which was familiar but not comfortable. She had the federal channel, Briscoe's team, the formal investigation infrastructure, but the granular work, the reading and the pattern recognition, and the quiet conversations with people who didn't want to be on any record, she'd done that in the gaps between 12-hour ER shifts, on overnight breaks, in parking garages, at kitchen tables that weren't hers. She was tired in a way she hadn't fully acknowledged until just now, standing in the cold outside a building that was being disassembled around its own occupants. "Caldwell," a voice behind her. Agent Torres, who'd been in the stairwell. Young, professional, a face that didn't give much away. The officer from the stairwell, Ruiz. "She's been asking who you are." "What'd you tell her?" "Nothing, but she's persistent." Torres paused. "She specifically asked if you were military." Emma looked at him. "What did she say exactly?" "She said, and I'm quoting, 'Is she one of the people from before? Because I recognized her.'" The November air felt slightly colder than it had a moment ago. "She said she recognized me." "That's what she said. Did she say from where?" "No, she stopped talking after that, like she realized she'd said too much." Emma turned that over. Ruiz was young, maybe 24. 4 months ago, Emma hadn't been in this city. 2 years ago, she'd been somewhere that didn't appear on any public record. The ways in which someone like Ruiz could recognize her were limited, and most of them were complicated. "Where is she now?" "Still in the lobby. Agent Ferris is with her." "I'll come in," Emma said. Torres moved to follow her, and she shook her head slightly. He stayed. The lobby was quieter than it had been. The cluster of officers had been sorted, some taken for individual interviews, some waiting in the conference room down the hall, which she knew because she'd memorized the floor plan. Patricia was still in her chair, still visibly communicating that none of this was her fault. Ruiz was near the front desk, standing with her arms crossed now, a posture that read as defensive to anyone who wasn't paying close attention and as something more specific to Emma. Not defensiveness, calculation. The arms crossed, the weight shifted slightly forward, a person figuring out their next move. Ruiz saw Emma come through the door and her expression changed, just briefly, just in the eyes, but Emma caught it. "Officer Ruiz," Emma said. "Yeah." "You said you recognized me." Ruiz's jaw tightened. "I said maybe." "You said recognized. Where from?" Ruiz was quiet for a moment. The fluorescent lobby lights were unkind to everyone, but they were particularly unkind to the expression Ruiz was wearing, a person trying to balance two things that weren't balancing well. I don't think I should say here. Then where? Ruiz's eyes moved to the agents in the room, to Patricia, to the television. She made a small decision that Emma could almost see being made. I need to talk to someone, not in this building. You can request a private interview with the federal team. Not them, Ruiz said. You. Emma looked at her. 24, maybe 25, 2 years on the force based on the wear on the uniform badge. Eyes that had seen more than 2 years of standard policing would explain. Emma had met people who looked like this before. Not criminals, not corruption, but witnesses. People sitting at the intersection of knowing something and being afraid of what knowing it cost. We can talk, Emma said, but not alone. A federal witness coordinator will need to be present. Fine, Ruiz exhaled. Fine. Okay. But I need you to know. I didn't know about all of it. Some of it I knew, and I didn't say anything, and I know what that makes me. I know. She stopped. But I've been trying to figure out how to... She stopped again. We'll get you set up with a coordinator, Emma said. That's the right process. Use it. Ruiz nodded, and the nod had relief in it, which was usually the thing that came after someone stopped carrying something alone. Emma had seen that too. She walked back outside. Briscoe was off the phone, standing near the command vehicle with a tablet in hand, and her face when she looked up had a particular set that Emma had learned to read as incoming complication. Garrison Road, Briscoe said. Emma went still. Already? Our team arrived 8 minutes ago. Unit 37 was accessed 22 minutes before they got there. She turned the tablet so Emma could see it. A security camera still from the facility's entrance. Someone got there first. The image was grainy and time-stamped. A figure in plain clothes, moving quickly, carrying what looked like a file box. The face was angled away from the camera with the practiced precision of someone who knew where the lens was. Emma looked at the still for a long moment. They cleaned it, she said. Partially. Team says there's material left. They think whoever went in was working fast and grabbed what they considered the most critical items. But there's residual documentation, some physical evidence they didn't get to. Briscoe's voice was controlled, but underneath it was the specific tension of an operation that had just gotten more complicated. Question is who called them? Voss made a call, Emma said, from his desk phone. We pulled the log. He called his lawyer. Then it wasn't the lawyer, Emma said, because a lawyer who helped a client clear evidence from a storage unit in the middle of an active federal operation was a lawyer writing their own disbarment. No, Briscoe agreed. Someone else. Someone who knew about the unit independently. Emma looked at the security still again. The angle of the body. The efficiency of movement. This wasn't a panicked response. Whoever this was, they had a plan for this scenario. Briscoe was watching her. You're thinking it's someone inside the investigation. I'm thinking it's someone who knew this was coming before this morning. Emma handed the tablet back. Not necessarily inside your team, but someone in proximity to enough information to know the unit existed and what it contained. That narrows it to 4 people on our side and however many on theirs. And whoever Voss shared it with off the books. Emma looked at the building. You should pull the storage facility's complete access log for the past 6 months. Every entry to Unit 37. Cross-reference it with department personnel. Already requested, Briscoe said. Should have it within the hour. She paused. How certain are you about the secondary phone? Not very, Emma admitted, but certain enough to mention it. Briscoe nodded. She looked at the building, then at the news vans at the perimeter. Internal Affairs arrives in 30 minutes. I need you in that briefing. I know. The full briefing, Caldwell, not the abbreviated version. Emma understood what she meant. The full briefing meant her complete background, her actual role, the scope of her involvement, all of it laid out in front of a room of internal affairs investigators who were going to have a lot of questions about how a nurse from Crestline Medical had become the operational linchpin of a federal investigation into their colleagues. She wasn't looking forward to it. Not because she was ashamed of any of it, but because rooms like that had a particular energy. Investigative, slightly adversarial, aimed at the nearest available target. and she'd spent most of the past year being useful from a position of invisibility. Stepping into the light meant something different. It meant the story changed, and stories, once they changed, didn't change back. 30 minutes, she said. She went back inside. The conference room on the first floor had been repurposed. A federal agent was setting up recording equipment at one end of the table. Files she recognized, copies, not originals, the originals being in secure federal custody, were arranged in orderly stacks. The room smelled like dry erase markers, and the particular staleness of a space that had held too many tense conversations. She sat in a chair against the wall and went through her phone. She had 2 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize, which she didn't answer. A text from her neighbor asking if she'd seen his package. A calendar reminder for a doctor's appointment she'd rescheduled twice. Ordinary things running alongside extraordinary ones, which was how most days actually worked. Her shoulder had stiffened where she'd hit the wall during the Rourke collision. She rolled it carefully, felt the pull of bruised muscle, filed it under things to deal with later. She'd had worse. She had a specific catalog of worse, collected over years in environments where the definition of a successful day was everyone going home. Not everyone had always gone home. She pushed that thought to the side. Not down, just aside, because there was a difference, and she'd learned it the hard way. At 9:27, voices in the hallway signaled the internal affairs team arriving. She could hear Briscoe's voice among them, moving through the standard procedural exchange of a briefing beginning. She heard someone say her name, not to her, just referencing her, in the tone people used when they were about to ask questions about someone. She stood, straightened her lanyard, and walked toward the door. She had her hand on the handle when her radio clicked. It wasn't Briscoe's voice. It was Torres from the stairwell, and his voice had a specific flatness that meant controlled urgency. Caldwell, we need you upstairs, now. I'm about to go into the IA briefing. I know, Briscoe says to come upstairs first. A pause, just a beat. We found something in the evidence room, something that wasn't in your files. Emma's hand stayed on the door handle for one more second. What kind of something? Another pause, slightly longer. The kind that changes the timeline, Torres said. She took her hand off the handle, turned away from the conference room, and moved toward the stairs. And behind her the door opened and a voice called her name, and she kept moving because whatever was upstairs had just become the most important thing in the building. And she did not yet know that it was also the thing that was going to make the next 24 hours considerably more dangerous than she had planned for. The evidence room smelled like sealed plastic and old paper, the specific combination of a space where things were stored with the intention of being retrieved, and sometimes weren't. Torres was waiting at the door. He didn't say anything when she came up the stairs, just stepped aside and let her through, which told her the something was visible enough that words would be redundant. The room was long and narrow, metal shelving on both sides running floor to ceiling, tagged boxes in systematic order. 2 agents were near the back, and between them, on a cleared section of a steel evidence table, was a box that had been opened. Not by them. The seal had been cut. Not torn, cut, with something precise, and reapplied with a different seal that was almost identical to the original. Almost. The color was 2 shades off. The font on the case number stamp was marginally wider. It was the kind of difference you'd miss if you weren't looking for it, and most people in most circumstances wouldn't be looking for it. Emma looked at it for a long moment without touching anything. When was this box last accessed legitimately? She said. One of the agents, a woman named Ferris, who Emma had seen in the lobby earlier, checked her tablet. Logged check-in 9 months ago. No subsequent access recorded. So someone got in here without logging it. Or logged it under a name that's in the system legitimately, and we haven't pulled that thread yet. Emma leaned in. The box was labeled with a case number she recognized. She recognized it because it was one of the cases in her files, one of the complaints that had been filed and gone quiet. A domestic incident report from 18 months ago, involving a man named Gerald Sutton, who had a civil rights lawsuit pending against the department and had complained specifically about evidence that he claimed existed and that the department claimed did not. She looked at Ferris. What's inside? That's the thing. Ferris carefully lifted one side of the box with gloved hands. It's been partially cleared. There are items here that correspond to the case manifest, but the manifest lists 14 items. We count 9. 5 items removed. and replaced with weight. Ferris tilted the box slightly. Emma could see it. Folded cardboard, stacked neatly at one end of the box to approximate the weight of what was no longer there. Whoever had done this had been methodical. They'd understood that evidence boxes get weighed on check-in, that a suddenly lighter box would flag. This wasn't panic, Emma said. This was planned. Way before today, Torres confirmed from the doorway. The replacement seal material. We'll need lab confirmation, but it looks like it was applied months ago, maybe longer. Emma straightened up. The implications were reorganizing themselves in her mind with the particular efficiency of a structure that had just received new load-bearing information. She'd built her case on the assumption that the corruption here was reactive, officers covering mistakes, burying inconvenient reports, the ordinary self-protective rot of institutions that had stopped being supervised. What this box suggested was something more deliberate. Someone had been managing the evidence room like a system, not cleaning up after individual failures, but actively maintaining a false state of the record. That was a different problem. How many other boxes are in this room? She asked. 212 active cases, Ferris said. We need to cross-reference every box manifest against its physical contents. Today. That's going to take— I know how long it's going to take, Emma said. It still needs to happen today. Ferris and Torres exchanged a look that was not quite disagreement but was in the neighborhood. Emma understood it. She was not their commanding officer. She was a civilian with a complex status and a federal authorization that gave her standing without giving her rank. The look meant, who does she think she is? It was a fair look. She'd been getting it her entire career. I'll clear it with Briscoe, she said, but start pulling manifests now. She went back into the hallway and called Briscoe. Briscoe answered on the second ring and listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Emma appreciated about her. She didn't perform being briefed. She just received information. The evidence room is a secondary crime scene, Emma finished. How systematic? I don't know the scope yet, but systematic enough that whoever did it understood evidence management protocols at an operational level. This isn't someone who happened to have access. This is someone who understood the system well enough to live inside it. A beat. That points to someone with extended tenure. Or training, Emma said. Or both. Briscoe was quiet for a moment. I'm going to pull the internal affairs briefing. We need to reframe the scope before we walk them in. I'd agree with that. Give me 20 minutes. Stay on 2. Emma stayed on 2. She moved down the hallway to a window that faced the east side of the building and stood there while the operation moved around her. Agents with tablets. A crime scene technician she hadn't seen before arriving with equipment. Somewhere below, a door opened and closed. Her shoulder ached. She pressed it against the window frame briefly, the cold of the glass pulling some of the heat out of the bruise, and looked at the parking lot below. The morning had gone fully bright, the weak November sun at the angle that cast long shadows off everything and made the world look slightly more dramatic than it was. She thought about Carla Devers. She thought about the intake file she'd read on that Tuesday in the break room, and about the specific case number that matched the tampered evidence box upstairs, and about the fact that Gerald Sutton's civil rights lawsuit was still in pretrial, and his lawyer had filed a motion 2 months ago for evidence production that the department had responded to with a motion to dismiss citing insufficient grounds. The evidence they'd cited as insufficient was in that box. The real version of it, anyway. Not the version that was there now with 5 items missing and cardboard standing in for whatever had been removed. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to a number she had saved under a first name only, Sutton case, evidence room, today matters. 3 minutes passed, then, understood. That was all she needed from that thread for now. The window reflected her back at herself. Blue scrubs, lanyard, the tear at the collar she hadn't fixed. She looked like a person who'd had a long day, and it was not yet 10 in the morning. She heard the stairwell door open behind her, footsteps, more than one person, and a voice she recognized as Briscoe's alongside one she didn't. She turned. Briscoe was moving down the hallway with a man Emma hadn't seen yet, mid-50s, civilian clothes, but carrying himself with the contained posture of someone who'd spent a significant portion of their life in uniform. He had a visitor's badge clipped to his jacket and a leather folder under his arm that had seen a lot of use. Caldwell, Briscoe said, this is Supervisory Director Warren Tate, Federal Oversight, Western Division. Emma looked at Tate. He looked at her with the specific attention of someone who was updating a file in real time. "Ms. Caldwell," he said. His voice was measured, the kind of measured that was a practiced trait rather than a natural one. "I've been briefed on your involvement. I want to hear it from you directly." "All of it?" she said. "The parts that aren't in the documentation. The Deanna Briscoe summary is thorough, but summaries make choices." He gestured toward the conference room at the end of the hall. "If you have time." She almost said something about the evidence room, about the priority of the manifest cross-reference, about the 20 things that needed to happen simultaneously. Instead, she said, "I have time." They sat across from each other in the conference room. Briscoe took a chair to the side and opened her tablet. The recording equipment that had been set up for the internal affairs briefing was still there, a detail Tate noted without commenting on. "You can turn that on," Emma said. "I don't need it off." Tate considered that. "Most people request otherwise." "I know." He turned on the recorder. "Start wherever you think is relevant." She started 4 months ago. She went through it methodically. Not a narrative exactly, more like a reconstruction, the way she'd been trained to document events in the field. The intake file, the pattern recognition, the initial contact with the federal channel, and the subsequent formal relationship with Briscoe's team. The months of parallel work, her day shifts at Crestline, her off hours building the evidentiary picture. She told him about the mileage reimbursements and the Garrison Road unit. She told him about the complaint that had started it, Carla Devers, and the 11 other complaints she'd traced through the system that showed the same pattern of disappearance. She told him about Danny Rourke and the data transfers, which the federal team had been developing from a different angle before her work intersected with theirs. She did not tell him everything. She told him everything that was documentable. The rest, the sources who'd spoken to her off the record, the conversations that had no transcript, the specific texture of knowledge you built through years of operating in environments where the formal record was only part of the picture, she held. Not deceptively. Just with the understanding that those things had their own proper context, and this wasn't it yet. Tate listened without interrupting until she stopped. "Your background," he said, "prior to Crestline. It's in the documentation. The documentation has a summary. I want to hear how you describe it." She looked at him. This was the part she didn't love, the reduction of complex experience into a form that was intelligible to people who hadn't been there. 8 years military service, combat medic, 2 forward deployments, 1 extended classified assignment. Medical discharge in 2000. Nerve damage in my right hand, partial. Completed nursing certification during recovery. Joined Crestline's ER team in 2022. The classified assignment, Tate said. "That's the gap in the documentation." "It's classified," she said. "I have clearance." "Then you can pull it through the appropriate channel," she said. "I'm not the right source for that." Tate held her gaze for a moment, then he nodded. A single nod, not conceding the point exactly, but filing it. "The tactical operation skills, the communication device you used this morning, the building lockdown. Federal authorization protocol. It's a standard federal notification tool. I was issued it through the formal channel when I was designated an operational asset for this investigation. Most operational assets don't walk in alone and trigger the lock. Most operational assets aren't also the primary researcher on the case," she said. "I was the right person for the delivery because I knew the building layout, I knew the personnel, and I had the documentation chain intact. Sending someone else would have introduced variables. You could have been arrested." "He'd have had a hard time making it stick," she said, "and I had a team outside." Tate looked at Briscoe. Briscoe looked at her tablet. It was not exactly an endorsement. It was the expression of a person who had been through Emma's judgment call after the fact and arrived at a grudging acceptance. "The torn document," Tate said. "You said witness destruction is a separate charge." "It is." "You were counting on him doing that." Emma paused. "I thought it was possible he'd react that way. He has a documented pattern of dismissive behavior toward individuals he perceives as lacking authority. I was presenting as someone he'd categorize as low status. You were presenting as a nurse." "I am a nurse." Tate was quiet for a moment. "And you expected him to tear it up." "I expected him to be contemptuous. I didn't know he'd go that far." She paused again. "I may have underestimated how much he'd want to establish dominance in front of his staff." It was the honest version. She'd thought he'd dismiss her, obstruct, maybe threaten. She hadn't fully anticipated the theatrical contempt of a man who'd never imagined being challenged by someone who looked like her. Tate made a note in his folder. The evidence room. What's your assessment of the scope? I think it's been actively managed for at least 2 years, possibly longer. I think whoever did it had both access and institutional knowledge. And I think the Garrison Road unit was the overflow, the things too sensitive to falsify in place, so they were physically removed. And whoever accessed the unit this morning knew we were coming. Yes. Which means the operational security of this investigation was compromised. She met his eyes. Yes. The word sat in the room. It was an uncomfortable word to say in a federal investigation. It implied something about the investigation itself, about the containment of information, about who'd had access to what and when. Tate closed his folder. I need to make a call. Give me 10 minutes. He left the room. Briscoe looked up from her tablet. You okay? She said. Yeah, Emma said. Who is he exactly? Within the structure. He runs oversight for major operations in the Western Division. He's not a threat to you, if that's what you're asking. I'm not asking about threats. I'm asking about leverage. He's positioned above the investigation, which means he can expand scope or contain it. She looked at the closed door. He didn't come here this morning because of the station. He came because of something else. Briscoe's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. You're perceptive. What is it? A pause. There's a parallel case. Different jurisdiction, different investigation. It has some intersecting elements with what's here. Briscoe set down her tablet. We've been aware of it for about 6 weeks. Some of the data transfers you connected to Rourke. They don't terminate at a local destination. They go somewhere else. Emma went still. How far somewhere else? State level, possibly beyond. Briscoe's voice was even. What you've built here is a piece of something larger than the Redwood Valley Department. The shape of the morning reorganized itself again. The tampered evidence box. The Garrison Road unit cleared in advance. Someone inside the investigation, or close to it, with enough information to move. All of it suddenly readable as not just local corruption protecting itself, but a node in something bigger trying to protect the larger network. Rourke's data transfers, Emma said. What was in them? Personnel files, witness information, specifically informant identities. The room was very quiet. Informant identities meant people, real people who'd talked to law enforcement under the assumption that their names would be protected. If those identities had moved up through a compromised channel to wherever Rourke was sending them, those people were not currently safe, had not been currently safe for however long the transfers had been running. How many identities? Emma said. We've confirmed 7, possibly more. Have they been contacted? We're trying. Briscoe's voice was carefully neutral in the way voices went neutral when the news underneath them was bad. 2 have been located and are in protective contact. The others are... She stopped. We haven't reached them yet. Emma stood up from the chair. She wasn't sure when she'd decided to stand. I know one of those cases, she said. The Sutton filing. His primary witness. There's a woman named Della Marsh who provided a statement. She lives in the Millhaven district. That name is on our list. Has she been contacted? Briscoe looked at her for a moment with the expression that meant she already knew the answer Emma didn't want to hear. She's on the priority contact list. We have someone... Emma's phone rang. The number was the first-name-only contact she'd texted earlier. She answered. It's me, the voice said. Marsh is not answering. Neighbor says her car is gone, which is wrong because she works nights and she parks it until afternoon. I went by 30 minutes ago. Emma's hand tightened on the phone. When was the last confirmed contact with her? Yesterday evening. She texted her sister at 9. Nothing since. Okay. She made her voice steady. Stay available. She ended the call. She looked at Briscoe. We have a problem that is not about evidence boxes. Briscoe was already reaching for her radio. What happened in the next 11 minutes was the controlled urgency of a situation that was escalating past its original parameters. Briscoe on the radio. Torres summoned back. Tate pulled out of whatever call he'd been on. The conference room becoming a command space in the way rooms changed when the stakes sharpened. Emma stood at the edge of it and gave them everything she had on Della Marsh, the address, the work schedule, The sister's name, the contact she'd used. She gave it clearly and quickly, the same way she'd been trained to relay medical information in the field, where clarity and speed were both non-negotiable. While she talked, part of her mind was running a different calculation. Della Marsh's statement in the Sutton case was significant, but not uniquely so. There were other witnesses, other documents. The reason her name would be prioritized in a data transfer wasn't because she was the most legally critical. It was because she had additional information that she hadn't formally provided yet. Information she'd told Sutton's lawyer she had, but wasn't ready to put on record. Emma knew this because Sutton's lawyer had told her 6 weeks ago in a parking garage on the east side of the city, speaking quietly with the engine running. She hadn't put it in her formal case files. It was one of the things she'd held back. Not deceptively, but because it belonged to Marsh, not to Emma, and Marsh had the right to decide when and whether it became evidence. She has additional testimony, Emma said, into the room, interrupting her own briefing on logistics. Unrecorded. Whoever pulled her name from that data transfer may know that. Tate looked at her sharply. How do you know about additional testimony? Because I talked to her lawyer, Emma said. 6 weeks ago. I was building context, not deposing a witness. I didn't put it in the formal file because it wasn't mine to document. You've been running threads outside the formal case structure, Tate said. I've been doing what the formal case structure can't do quickly, Emma said. And right now Della Marsh's car is missing and she hasn't texted her sister in 14 hours, so I'd appreciate if we address that before we address my methodology. The room was very briefly silent. Tate looked at Briscoe. Briscoe gave him a fractional nod that said, in whatever language they'd developed between them, that Emma's argument was correct, and there would be time for the other conversation later. Get a team to Marsh's address, Tate said. And the sister. Torres was already moving. Emma turned to the window. The east side parking lot below was a different picture than it had been an hour ago. More vehicles, the perimeter expanded, a cluster of department personnel under a portable awning being interviewed individually. The morning looked like what it was, an institution being taken apart. She thought about the Sutton case, about Carla Devers and the 11 other complaints, about the shape of something that had looked for 4 months like local rot, and that was now showing its edges as something larger and more deliberate. She thought about the person who'd accessed the Garrison Road unit with enough advance notice to be in and out before the federal team arrived. That person existed somewhere in the proximity of this investigation. In this building, possibly. Or in the communication chain of someone who'd been in this building. She turned back to the room. The IA briefing, she said. Who had access to the notification that it was happening today? Tate's eyes moved to her with the attention of someone who'd just heard something they needed to examine. A limited distribution. How limited? 8 people. My team, Briscoe's unit lead, the federal attorney on record. And notification of my specific role? Who had that? Briscoe answered. Smaller, 5. My direct team. You were identified as an operational asset, but your background. My background is in the classified summary. Who could pull a classified summary within the federal system? The room went still in a different way than it had gone still before. That's a significant implication, Tate said carefully. I know what it is, Emma said. I'm asking who could do it. Tate looked at her for a long moment. She watched him doing something she recognized, the internal accounting of trust, the revisiting of conversations, the re-examination of details that had seemed incidental. It was what happened when a person started to understand that they might have a leak in a place they'd considered sealed. We'll need to treat the operational security as compromised, she said. From here forward, all communication about this investigation on secured channels only. No email. No standard radio for sensitive coordinates. Agreed, Tate said. And I need access to the full data transfer log, not the summary, the raw log. The metadata, the destination routing, all of it. Tate studied her. That goes into classified territory. My clearance is current, she said. Pull my file. Another moment. Then Tate reached for his own phone and made a call. While he made it, Emma's radio clicked. It was Torres calling in from the field team that had moved on Marsh's address. We're at the Millhaven apartment, Torres said. No sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle. But, Emma said, because there was always a but in that tone. Back door was unlocked. She's meticulous about locking it. Neighbor confirmed. And in the kitchen, a pause that lasted exactly long enough to be concerning. "There's a coffee mug on the counter, half full, still warm." Emma looked at the time, 10:47. Marsh's car had been gone since before Torres's source had passed at 9, but the coffee was still warm. "She left in a hurry," Emma said. "Or she was asked to leave in a hurry," Torres said. The distinction mattered, willingly versus not. It changed everything about what kind of problem this was and how fast it needed to move. "Canvass the building," Emma said. "Anyone who might have seen her after 9 a.m., check if there are cameras at the building entrance." "On it." She lowered the radio and found that Tate had ended his call and was watching her. "Your clearance is current," he said. "The data log will be on the secured terminal in 20 minutes. "Thank you." "Ms. Caldwell." Something in his voice had changed slightly. Not warmer exactly, but the professional distance had adjusted a degree. "For what it's worth, what you built here, the case structure, the documentation, it's solid. Whatever else comes out of today." She looked at him. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm not done building it." He gave her a short nod that acknowledged the statement without trying to contain it. She left the conference room and went back upstairs because the data terminal they were accessing was on the second floor, and she had 20 minutes before it was ready, and she wanted to be in the evidence room when the manifest cross-reference started producing results. The second floor hallway had the particular quality of a space in controlled crisis. People moving with direction, the noise level just above normal, the air carrying the specific charge of things being discovered. The kind of environment she'd spent years working in a different context, in different terrain. The texture was recognizable even when nothing else was. She was halfway to the evidence room when a door opened behind her. Not from an office. From the stairwell she'd just come from. She turned. Officer Ruiz was in the doorway. Not in the building. She'd been told to wait in the lobby, to talk to a federal witness coordinator. She was supposed to be downstairs. She looked at Emma with an expression that had abandoned all of its earlier composure. "I need to tell you something before they set up the formal interview," Ruiz said, "before it becomes official. You should tell the coordinator there's a witness they're looking for. Marsh, Della Marsh." Ruiz's voice was low and fast. "I know where she is." Emma went very still. "She called me this morning," Ruiz said. She didn't know who else to call. She was scared. She'd gotten a message last night. Anonymous, she said, warning her that her name had been compromised and she needed to move. So she went somewhere she thought was safe. Ruiz looked at Emma with the eyes of a person handing over something heavy. "She went to the last person she trusted in this department." Emma kept her voice even. "Where is she?" Ruiz opened her mouth, and then from below them, somewhere in the building's lower floor, there was a sound, sharp, singular, impossible to misidentify to anyone who'd spent time in operational environments, that stopped every other sound in the building around it. Emma was already moving toward the stairwell before the echo finished. She took the stairs fast, one hand on the railing, Ruiz right behind her, and by the time she hit the first-floor landing, the building had already changed. The operational calm replaced by something tighter, voices cutting across each other, radio traffic spiking. The sound had come from the east corridor. She knew it before she got there, was already mapping the possibilities as she moved. Discharge, accidental or deliberate, from a service weapon. The caliber had been medium, a standard sidearm, not a rifle. One shot. No follow-up, which meant either the situation had resolved in the first second or whoever fired had stopped for a reason. She came around the corner and stopped. The east corridor had 4 people in it, 2 federal agents she recognized. A uniformed department officer flat against the wall with his hands up and a look on his face like a man who'd just made the worst decision of his life. And on the floor, seated with his back against the wall and his right hand pressed to his left forearm, was Danny Rourke. The laptop bag was gone. He'd already been processed, transferred to agent custody. What he was doing in this corridor instead of the holding area made no sense for approximately 3 seconds, and then it made complete sense. "He wasn't running," Torres said, coming up from the other direction. His voice was controlled but tight. "He was being moved. Someone told the transport team he'd been cleared for a different holding location." "Who told them?" "Working on it." Emma crouched beside Rourke. He was conscious, breathing fast, holding his arm with the focused attention of a person managing pain. She pulled his hand away from the wound, A graze, maybe 3 centimeters of open tissue along the outside of the forearm, bleeding but not arterial, not life-threatening. He was going to be fine physically, which was not the most relevant fact, but was the one she needed to establish first. "Look at me," she said. Rourke looked at her. His face was 26 and terrified. "You're not seriously hurt," she said. "The wound is superficial. Do you understand?" He nodded. "The shot came from the officer?" He said he had authorization to move me. He had a badge. He knew my name." Rourke's voice was shaking but coherent. "When I said I wanted to confirm with the agents, he pulled the weapon. I ran. He fired." Emma looked at the officer against the wall. He was maybe 30, someone she hadn't registered in the morning's processing because there had been a lot of uniformed personnel and she'd focused on the command level. His name tag said Brandt. He was still in the hands-up posture, which meant he was making a specific choice about how to handle this moment. "Brandt," she said. His eyes moved to her. "Who told you to move him?" Brandt's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. "You fired a service weapon in a federal operation," she said, "at an unarmed person in federal custody. The question of who gave you the order is the difference between following instructions and acting independently. You want to think carefully about which version of this you're carrying." Brandt's eyes moved to the agents, to Torres, back to her. He was calculating. She could see it happening, the arithmetic of a man who'd been used for something and was only now understanding the extent of the use. "I got a text," he said finally, "on my personal phone. It said Rourke had been designated for transfer to a secondary holding location. It had a case number and a federal authorization code." "Who sent it?" "It came from an internal department number. I thought it was legitimate." "Do you still have the phone?" He moved one hand slowly toward his pocket. "Yes." "Don't touch it," Torres said. He had gloves out. "I'll take it." Brandt handed it over with the careful movements of a man trying to demonstrate that every action he took from this point forward was going to be cooperative. The phone went into an evidence bag. Torres moved toward the far end of the corridor to relay the information. Emma stood up. One of the agents had a first aid kit open and was moving toward Rourke with the brisk competence of someone who'd done field medicine before. She stepped back and let them work. The text to Brandt's personal phone, a department number, an authorization code that was convincing enough to move a 30-year-old officer without question. Whoever had done this had done it fast, within the last hour, while the operation was running, while everyone in the building was focused on the rooms being processed and the personnel being interviewed. It was a play for Rourke specifically, not to free him. You couldn't get Rourke out of a building surrounded by federal vehicles, but to move him, isolate him, and have a conversation with him that wasn't being recorded in the official holding area. "They wanted to talk to him," Emma said, to nobody in particular. Torres coming back from the far end of the corridor. "What?" "Whoever sent that text, they weren't trying to get Rourke out of the building. They wanted 5 minutes with him in an unmonitored space." She looked at Rourke, who was now having his arm dressed by the agent. "What would someone need to ask you?" she said. "Privately, urgently, right now. What do you know that they'd want to confirm?" Rourke looked at her with the expression of a person sorting through several bad options. "The routing," he said finally. "The data transfers. I know where everything went, not just the destination addresses. I know the access credentials, the ones I used to push the transfers. Those credentials could be used to access whatever received the data." "Yes. And if someone needed to know whether those credentials had been changed, whether you'd already given them to us, they couldn't wait for the formal interview process." Rourke swallowed. "I hadn't given them to you yet. I was going to, in the interview." He looked at his bandaged arm. "I think someone knew that." Emma turned to Torres. "Where's the formal interview queue? Who was next up to be processed?" "Rourke was," Torres said. 40 minutes out from now." 40 minutes. Someone inside the building, or with access to the building's real-time processing schedule, had known that Rourke hadn't talked yet and had moved to intercept him before he did. The sophistication of it was slightly nauseating, not because she hadn't anticipated that the operation might have a leak. She'd raised that possibility an hour ago. But anticipating something and watching it execute in real time were different experiences. She went to find Briscoe. Briscoe was in the command vehicle, on a secured line, and she held up a finger when Emma appeared at the door. Emma waited. 30 seconds, which felt longer. Then Briscoe ended the call. "Rourke," Emma said. "I heard." Torres relayed. The text to Brandt came from inside the building. From a department phone, yes. Briscoe's voice was even in the way it went, even when she was actively suppressing something. We're triangulating the origin now. The authorization code in the text was real, pulled from a legitimate federal format. Someone had access to current federal authorization codes. Emma looked at her. From within the investigation. It looks that way. Not just proximity, active participation. Briscoe was quiet for a moment. Yes. Tate needs to know. Tate already knows. He's pulling his own personnel records right now. Briscoe's expression didn't change exactly, but something around her eyes tightened. This is going somewhere none of us planned for this morning. What about Marsh? Emma said. Ruiz said she knows where Marsh is. Ruiz is currently being set up for a formal interview. Ruiz said she was going to tell me before the formal interview. I was about to get the location when the shot happened. Emma glanced back toward the building. We need that location. If Marsh went to someone she trusted in the department, and if whoever is running interference inside this operation also knows that you think Marsh is at risk. The coffee was warm, Emma said. She left in a hurry at someone's suggestion. She trusted someone. Given how today has developed, I'd like to know who that someone is before they know we're asking. Briscoe considered for exactly 3 seconds, which was Briscoe's version of rapid deliberation. Talk to Ruiz. Now, before the formal process, I'll authorize it. But Caldwell, whatever she tells you, it comes back to me directly before anyone else moves. Understood. Emma went back inside. Ruiz was in the lobby, separated from the main cluster of waiting personnel, sitting in one of the plastic chairs with her arms on her knees and her eyes on the floor. She looked up when Emma came through. Come with me, Emma said. They went to a small office off the main hallway. A utility space, really, with a desk that had nothing on it and 2 chairs that didn't match. Emma left the door open because closed doors in this building today would trigger the wrong kind of attention. Where is she? Emma said. Ruiz looked at her hands. She's with someone she considers safe, not an officer. She specifically didn't want to go to an officer. She called me because I'd talked to her 2 months ago about the Sutton case. I wasn't investigating it. I wasn't involved. She needed someone to talk to, and I listened. Ruiz's voice carried the particular guilt of someone who'd done something ordinary and was now watching it become complicated. She's with her neighbor from 2 buildings down, a woman named Pat Sorrento, retired, lives at the Meridian Apartments on Claremont. Emma had her phone out. She typed the address and sent it to Briscoe via the secured message channel. Did you tell anyone else she called you? Emma asked. No. I was going to tell the coordinator, but then you were there and then… Ruiz stopped. The shot. What happened? Someone tried to interfere with an interview, Emma said. It didn't work. But it means the situation is more active than we planned for this morning. Ruiz went slightly pale. Is she… Marsh, is she… We don't know yet. We're moving on the address. Emma looked at her. What you said upstairs, that you recognized me from before. Ruiz was quiet for a moment. I wasn't sure I should say anything. Say it now. Another moment. I did a civilian ride-along program 2 years ago. Before I joined the department, there was a training session, medical response integration, first responders and medical teams working joint scenarios. Ruiz looked at her. You were one of the trainers. You weren't introduced by your full name, just Emma. But I remembered because you were… She paused, looking for the right word. You were different from the other trainers. You knew things they didn't. The way you talked about field decisions, triage under pressure. It wasn't textbook. It was something else. Emma looked at her. A training session 2 years ago, one of several she'd done during the transition period when she was finishing her nursing certification and still consulting on medical response integration for federal programs. Standard work. Nothing classified. But the kind of thing that left impressions, apparently. You recognized me, and you didn't say anything to anyone here, Emma said. When I realized what was happening this morning, when I saw you in the lobby and understood you weren't just a delivery person, I didn't say anything because I thought… Ruiz exhaled. I thought if you were here, doing this, then there was a reason it needed to happen, and saying something might compromise it. Emma looked at her for a moment. 24 years old, 2 years on a force that was currently being dismantled around her, making judgment calls about operational security based on a ride-along training session and an instinct. That was good thinking, Emma said. Not warmly, as a statement of fact. The formal interview is going to ask you about everything. What you knew about Marsh, what you observed in the department over the past 2 years, anything that seemed off. You need to answer all of it. I know, Ruiz said. I have some things to say. Say them to the coordinator, not to me. Emma stood. And Ruiz, the things you observed and didn't report at the time. That's going to be part of the conversation. You understand that? Yes. Ruiz met her eyes. I know what I didn't do. I've been sitting with it. Emma left her there and moved back into the main flow of the building, where the operation had reorganized itself around the new information. The first floor had the contained intensity of a situation that had expanded past its original parameters and was adapting. People on phones, agents cross-referencing, the forensic team that had been processing the evidence room now partially redirected to the corridor where Brandt had fired. She found Torres near the stairwell. The Rourke interview, she said. Has it been rescheduled? Tate's moving it up. 15 minutes, secured room on 2. I want to be present. Torres looked at her in the way people looked at her when they were deciding whether to push back. He decided against it. I'll clear it. She went upstairs. The secured room on the second floor had been one of the department's internal investigation rooms, a coincidence with a certain bleak symmetry. A federal technician had set up recording equipment. Tate was already there, seated at the table, reviewing something on a tablet. He looked up when she came in. Marsh is at the Meridian Apartments on Claremont, she said. Apartment of a woman named Pat Sorrento. Ruiz confirmed. Tate related immediately. She heard the response come back. Team en route, ETA 9 minutes. Sit, Tate said. She sat. The room was small, the kind of small that made conversations feel pressurized. A two-way mirror on the far wall reflected the table back at them. 2 minutes later, Rourke was brought in. His arm was bandaged under his sleeve. His face had moved from terrified to something more resigned, the expression of a person who had burned every bridge in front of him and was now looking at the ash. He sat across from Tate. Emma was to the side, not officially interviewing, present as a technical consultant, which was a category that covered a substantial amount of territory. Tate stated the case number, the date, the participants. Then he looked at Rourke. The access credentials, Tate said. All of them. Every transfer, every destination. We're going to go through it completely. Rourke looked at his bandaged arm, then at the table. I want something in writing first. The federal attorney has been notified. Documentation is being prepared. It will be in your hands within the hour. Tate's voice was level. But we don't have an hour to spare on the Marsh situation. The destination routing, just that right now. And then we'll wait for the documentation. Rourke considered this. Emma watched him considering it. The calculation of a 26-year-old who'd done something very stupid for reasons she suspected were not purely financial and was now trying to figure out how to land from a very bad altitude. 3 destinations, Rourke said. The first 2 were internal, a private server registered to Harrow Creek Consulting. Voss's shell company, Emma said. Rourke looked at her, surprised she knew. Yes. The third destination was external, outside the department, outside the city. It routed through a VPN, but I know what's behind it because I set up the routing myself. He paused. It connects to a server registered to a company called Aldermore Group. Tate's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Aldermore Group. You know it, Emma said. Not a question. I know the name, Tate said carefully. It appears in the parallel case. He looked at Rourke. How long has the Aldermore routing been active? 22 months. The number landed in the room and sat there. 22 months of informant data, evidence records, witness information flowing from a local police department through a shell company to a private entity with connections to a federal-level parallel investigation. Not reactive, not local. A sustained, deliberate operation that had been running since before Emma had ever heard of Redwood Valley. She looked at the two-way mirror and saw her own reflection, blue scrubs, borrowed room, the specific expression she wore when something resolved into a shape she didn't love but recognized. Who at Aldermore, she said. I only ever communicated with one person, Rourke said, through encrypted message. I never had a name. He hesitated. But they knew things about this investigation, current things, things that hadn't happened yet when they messaged me. He looked at the table. 3 days ago, they told me federal teams would be coming. They said be ready to clear the Harrow Creek materials. 3 days ago. The federal operation had been finalized in terms of timing 4 days ago, in a meeting that included Tate's team, Briscoe's unit, and the federal attorney, 8 people total. Emma looked at Tate. He was looking at the table with the expression of a man doing arithmetic he didn't want to arrive at. Warren, she said. He looked up at her. She almost never used first names, and the shift registered. The 8 people in the timing meeting, she said quietly. One of them has a connection to Aldermore Group. Tate set down his tablet. He looked at her with an expression that was not confirmation and was not denial. He looked like a man looking at a structural failure he'd spent years trying to prevent. That's a significant claim, he said. 3 days ago, she said. Someone in that room. The room was very quiet. Then Tate's phone rang. He looked at the screen and answered it before the second ring. He listened for 15 seconds. His face, which had already lost most of its professional composure, went a shade that Emma associated with genuinely bad news. He ended the call. The team reached the Meridian Apartments, he said. Emma waited. Marsh is there. She's safe. A pause. But she's not alone. There was someone with her when the team arrived. Already there. Already inside Sorrento's apartment. He looked at Emma with the eyes of a man who'd just watched his containment fail in a specific direction he hadn't prepared for. She says the person told her they were federal, showed her a badge. Was it legitimate? The badge number belongs to an agent currently in this building, Tate said. An agent who has been in this building all morning. The silence lasted exactly 1 second. But someone was using it at the Meridian Apartments, Emma said. Yes. She stood up from the chair. Her mind was running the geometry of it. Who had been where this morning? Who'd had access to what? Which badge number could be lifted from a personnel file that could be accessed through the same system that held federal authorization codes and classified summaries and the timing of federal operations? Who is it? She said. The agent whose badge number was used. Tate looked at her with the expression of a person handing over something that couldn't be taken back. Deanna Briscoe, he said. Emma went very still. Not because she believed it, because she understood immediately and completely what it meant that someone had chosen Briscoe's badge number specifically. Not a random federal credential, not a number from the pool of agents, but the supervisory agent who had been Emma's primary contact for 3 months, whose name was on every document, whose authorization codes were woven through the formal structure of the entire investigation. If someone had used Briscoe's credentials to access Marsh, they weren't just running interference. They were trying to make Briscoe look like the leak. She turned toward the door. Caldwell, Tate said. I know where Briscoe is, Emma said. She's in the command vehicle. She's been there. She's been visible. She stopped at the door and looked back at him. Someone is trying to frame her, which means whoever is actually connected to Aldermore needed to create a target before we got close enough to find them. She looked at Tate with the full weight of what she was about to say. Which means we're close, she said, right now. We are close enough that they panicked. She walked out of the room and down the hallway, moving fast, because panic made people act and action left traces, and the next 20 minutes were going to determine whether they caught the thread before it was cut, and she had been in enough operations to know that the window between close enough and too late was narrower than anyone wanted it to be. Behind her, she heard Tate on his phone, his voice stripped down to its essential register, not the measured directorial tone, but something older and more direct underneath it, calling in a containment order that covered every exit of a building that was supposedly already contained. And somewhere in that building, someone who had been present all morning, who had watched the operation unfold from the inside, who had used the knowledge of it to protect something larger than Redwood Valley and more dangerous than a corrupt police chief, was deciding what to do next. Emma reached the stairwell and went down. She hit the ground floor at a near run and pushed through the door into the cold November air and crossed the distance to the command vehicle in 12 steps. Briscoe was where she'd left her, standing beside the SUV with her tablet, talking to one of the perimeter agents, completely visible, completely accountable for her location over the past several hours, in a way that a person framing her would know made the frame fragile but did it anyway because a fragile frame still buys time. Briscoe, Emma said. Briscoe looked at her and read something in her face. She dismissed the perimeter agent with a word. What happened? Someone used your badge number to access Della Marsh at the Meridian Apartments. showed it to Marsh as federal identification. Briscoe went very still. The kind of still that was not shock, but the immediate conversion of shock into operational processing. When? Within the last hour. Team found Marsh safe, but she'd been with someone presenting as you. Emma watched her face. Whoever it is, they're inside this operation. They had your badge number, current federal authorization codes, and 3 days advance notice on the timing. The timing meeting, Briscoe said. Yes. Briscoe's eyes moved to the building, then back to Emma. 8 people. 7, if we remove you. Emma said it carefully. Not an accusation, not a reassurance, just arithmetic. Tate is pulling the containment order now. Nobody out. The building is already sealed. Then whoever it is has been here all morning, watching. Emma looked at the building too. They sent the text to Brandt's phone from inside. They tried to intercept Rourke before his interview. When that failed, they used your credentials to get to Marsh directly. 3 moves, Briscoe said, all within 2 hours. Panicked moves, Emma said. Not planned. They planned the Garrison Road access. That was organized, pre-positioned. Everything since has been reactive. She looked at Briscoe. They didn't expect Rourke to be moved up in the interview queue. They didn't expect Ruiz to know where Marsh was. They've been improvising since about 9 a.m. Briscoe's jaw tightened. My badge number is in the personnel directory. Anyone with internal access could pull it. Yes, but they chose yours specifically. Emma kept her voice level. They wanted to create a target that would slow the investigation. If we spent the next 2 hours processing whether you were compromised, that's 2 hours they used to finish whatever they started at the Garrison Road unit. Briscoe looked at her for a long moment. You're certain I'm not the target because I'm the liability. You're not the target because you've been standing next to a federal command vehicle in full view of 2 news cameras and approximately 40 federal agents all morning, Emma said. The frame doesn't hold. Whoever built it knows that, which means they built it to buy minutes, not to actually stick. Briscoe exhaled. Then we used the minutes better than they expected. She reached for her radio. I'm going to pull the personnel access log for the past 3 hours. Every keycard swipe, every system login, every communication routed through the building's internal network. I need to be in that room. You will be. Briscoe stopped. Caldwell. The parallel case. Aldermore Group. Have you heard that name before today? Emma looked at her. No. I have, Briscoe said. Twice. Once in a briefing that predated this investigation by 8 months. Once in a document that was routed to my desk and then recalled 20 minutes later. She paused. At the time, I assumed the recall was administrative. A misfiled document. Emma absorbed that. You think it wasn't? I think someone wanted me to see that name and then wanted the paper trail of me seeing it to disappear. Briscoe's expression was the specific gravity of a person who had just reordered several months of memory and not liked where they landed. I think I've been part of this picture longer than I knew. They went inside. The next 40 minutes were the most technically dense of the day. The personnel access log pulled up on a secured terminal in the second-floor operations room showed exactly what Emma had predicted and slightly more than she'd hoped for. A clear pattern of internal system access that, laid against the timeline of the morning's events, told a story with the coherence of something that hadn't tried hard enough to hide itself because it had expected to be done before anyone looked. At 6:58 a.m., before Emma had even entered the building, someone had logged into the federal case management system using credentials belonging to Agent Ferris. Ferris, who had been in the lobby when Emma arrived. Ferris, whose credentials had been used to pull Emma's classified summary, Briscoe's badge number, and the full witness list attached to the Sutton case. Ferris, who was currently in the evidence room on the second floor where she'd been assigned to the manifest cross-reference. Emma looked at the log, then at Briscoe, then at Tate, who'd come upstairs while they were working and was standing behind them reading over their shoulders. She's been in my team for 14 months, Tate said. His voice had gone flat in the way voices went flat when they were carrying something heavy and not going to show it. The Aldermore routing, Emma said. Rourke said he communicated with one encrypted contact for 22 months. 14 months ago, Ferris joined your team. She paused. That's 8 months of the routing running before she had internal federal access. Someone recruited her and then positioned her. Positioned her, Tate said. She's not the top of it, Emma said. She's a node. Aldermore Group put an asset in your operation the same way they put an asset in the department. Someone with access, someone with plausible legitimacy, someone who could manage the flow of information. Tate was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than his moments usually lasted. She's been in my briefings. Yes. She knew everything. Yes. The word sat between them, and it was a hard word because it meant the past 14 months of Tate's operation had been conducted with someone inside it who understood its shape and reported that shape outward. It meant certain failures that had seemed like bad luck were not bad luck. It meant some of the difficulty of the parallel case, the way threads had gone cold at inconvenient moments, had a specific human explanation. Emma didn't say any of that. Tate was already thinking it. Saying it would not help and would cost something. We need to move on her now, Briscoe said, before she realizes the log has been pulled. Tate straightened. She doesn't know we're looking at the terminal. Not yet, Emma said. She's been in the evidence room. She doesn't have visibility on this floor. Tate took one breath. Then he turned to Torres, who was at the door. Bring her up. Professional. Don't signal anything. Torres left. The room waited. Emma looked at the access log on the terminal, at the timestamps that told the story of a morning that had started before she'd walked through the front door, of a plan that had been running for 22 months, through a server registered to a name that connected to something larger than any single police department in any single city. She thought about the 7 confirmed informant identities in Rourke's data transfers, about Carla Devers and Gerald Sutton and Della Marsh, and the specific texture of what it meant to trust a system and have that trust used as a mechanism against you. She thought about the woman in the lobby this morning, Patricia, still sitting in her chair, arms crossed, communicating that none of this was her fault, and all the people like her, adjacent to corruption without being part of it, living in the shadow of something they half-sensed but couldn't name. The door opened. Ferris came in ahead of Torres, moving with the professional ease of someone who'd been called upstairs for a routine matter. She was mid-30s, competent-looking, with the contained effect of someone who'd spent a long time being useful and unremarkable. She looked at the room, at Tate, at Briscoe, at Emma, and something in her face did a very small, very fast recalibration that Emma caught because she'd been watching for it. Director Tate, Ferris said. Agent Ferris, Tate said. Sit down. She sat. She was good. Emma gave her that. The affect didn't break. She sat with the posture of someone being pulled into an unexpected meeting, not someone watching a trap close. Tate put his tablet on the table. The access log was on the screen. 6:58 a.m., he said. Your credentials. Federal Case Management System. Ferris looked at the screen. I logged in this morning to verify case parameters before the operation began. That's standard. The specific files accessed at 6:58, Tate said. The classified summary on Emma Caldwell. The witness list on the Sutton case. Supervisory Agent Briscoe's badge number. Ferris looked at the screen for slightly longer than the situation required. I was doing a comprehensive case review. Those files would have been part of... Agent Ferris, Briscoe's voice from the side of the room, quiet and final. We have the routing log for the external data transfers. We have Rourke's testimony on the Aldermore connection. We have 22 months of metadata. A pause. You can finish the sentence you were building, but I'd like you to understand what we already have before you do. The room was very quiet. Ferris looked at the tablet. She looked at the wall. She looked at her own hands on the table. I want a federal attorney, she said. Being arranged, Tate said. Right now in this room, I need one answer. Aldermore Group. Who is the principal? Ferris was quiet. There are 7 people whose identities were transferred through Rourke's routing, Emma said, from her position at the side of the room. Ferris looked at her. 7 people who trusted the system enough to give their names to it. Some of them have been reachable today. Some haven't. She kept her voice even. The principal at Aldermore. We're going to find them. The access logs, the metadata, the routing architecture Rourke built. It all points somewhere. The question is whether we get there in 2 days or 2 months. She paused. 2 months is a long time for people whose names are in a compromised system. Ferris looked at her with an expression that was hard to read. Not guilt exactly, not defiance. Something more complicated than either, the expression of a person who'd made a series of decisions that had felt manageable individually and were only now visible as a whole. Hargrove, Ferris said. Lena Hargrove. She runs Aldermore Group's legal division out of the state capitol. A pause. She has connections to 3 members of the State Oversight Committee. Tate picked up his phone. What followed was not cinematic. It was procedural and difficult and involved 4 separate phone calls and a secure video link to a federal attorney who looked like she hadn't slept and spoke in the rapid cadences of someone managing multiple threads simultaneously. Ferris was formally processed, rights stated, attorney notified, removed from the room by Torres and a second agent. The access log was preserved and transmitted to 2 separate secure federal archives. Tate made his calls. Emma stood in the hallway and let the building breathe around her. Her shoulder hurt. Her feet hurt, though she hadn't particularly noticed until now. The tear in her collar had gotten slightly larger at some point in the morning. She still had the travel mug that had been cold since before 8 a.m. She thought about whether she was hungry and concluded that she was, in the abstract way that people were hungry when they'd been operating on adrenaline and the adrenaline was beginning to exhale. Briscoe came out of the room and stood beside her. Hargrove, Emma said. Tate's team had her adjacent to the parallel case, Briscoe said. Not as a target, as a peripheral name, someone who appeared in documentation and got passed over. A pause. She built something that used local corruption as a data collection infrastructure. The department here, and apparently 2 others in adjacent counties, feeding witness and informant data through a system that she monetized. Sold to private interests who needed to know which legal threats were credible and which could be managed. Emma processed that. The corruption at Redwood Valley Police Headquarters, the buried complaints, the tampered evidence, the officers like Hale and Voss who'd operated without accountability for years, had not just been local failure. It had been useful to someone external. The corruption had been cultivated, or at minimum preserved, because a functioning corrupt department was a productive node in a network that ran on information. Carla Devers, Emma said. Her complaint disappeared not just because Voss wanted it gone. It disappeared because someone was monitoring for complaints that might generate federal attention and making sure they went nowhere. That's the current theory, Briscoe said. We'll know more as we pull the Aldermore records. Emma looked at the wall across from her. So the whole time I was building this case, thinking I was uncovering a local problem, you were, Briscoe said. It is a local problem. It's also connected to something larger. Both things are true. A pause. The local victims are still the local victims. Carla Devers, Gerald Sutton, Marsh, the 11 other complaints you traced. Their cases don't become less real because there's a larger architecture around them. No, Emma said. They don't. They stood in the hallway for a moment, 2 people at the end of a very long morning. Tate's going to want you for the debrief, Briscoe said. Full scope. Everything, including the off-record sources. I know. That's going to be a long conversation. I know that too. Briscoe looked at her. You should probably eat something first. Emma looked at her travel mug. I should probably get a new coffee. Something in Briscoe's face shifted. Not a smile, but the near miss of one. Yeah. They went downstairs. The debrief lasted 4 hours and produced a document that Emma would never fully read in its final form, because documents like that circulated in spaces that didn't always reach the people who generated the raw material. She answered every question. She named the off-record sources by the agreed process. Not in the open record, but through a formal protected channel that preserved both the information and the people who'd given it. She walked through 4 months of parallel work with the same methodical clarity she'd brought to everything else. Tate listened. When she was done, he asked 3 follow-up questions, each more specific than the last, and her answers to all 3 were complete, and she didn't qualify them more than the facts required. At the end of it, Tate said, "The classified assignment, the one you told me to pull through proper channels." "Yes," she said. "I pulled it." He looked at her across the table. "The tactical assessment work, the medical response integration consulting, the field experience behind the pattern recognition you applied here. It's more extensive than the standard summary reflects." "Summaries make choices," she said, returning his words from the morning. He acknowledged that with a short nod. "There are people in the federal system who are going to want to talk to you, not about this case, about future work." She looked at him. "I'm a nurse." "You're several things," he said, returning her words too. His version of a peace offering, she thought, meeting her where she'd started. "I'll think about it," she said, which was honest. She'd been thinking about it in one form or another since she'd finished her nursing certification and realized that the two halves of what she was capable of kept finding ways to require each other. She left the building at 2:37 p.m. The federal perimeter was still up, but had contracted. The news vans were still there, had been joined by a third, and the story was already running in some form on the screens she glimpsed through car windows as she crossed the parking lot. She didn't look at them. The story wasn't hers to narrate. It was Carla Deaver's story, and Gerald Sutton's, and Della Marsh's, and 11 other people's, and probably more she hadn't found yet. She had done the work that made it visible. The visibility itself belonged to them. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 3 minutes before starting it. Not recovering. She didn't have that kind of time today. The debrief notes still needed her personal review, and she had a 7 a.m. shift at Crestline tomorrow. Just sitting, giving the morning its due. Her shoulder ached. She'd have it looked at tomorrow, assuming the ER wasn't chaos, which it almost always was. She started the car. The formal charges were filed over the following 9 days, and they were significant. Victor Hale was charged with destruction of federal documentation, obstruction of a federal investigation, and misuse of law enforcement authority across a documented period of 3 years. The charges were not the end of the accounting. Civil litigation from 4 separate complainants was filed in parallel, and Hale, who had spent a decade operating on the assumption that his rank was a form of protection, discovered that it was instead a form of record. Every decision he'd made was in a system. Every decision had a timestamp. Marcus Voss was charged with evidence tampering, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and abuse of public trust. The Harrow Creek Consulting LLC was dissolved by federal order, its assets frozen, its 2 years of documentation entered into evidence in both the local case and the parallel Aldermore investigation. Voss retained counsel and said nothing publicly for 3 weeks, and then his counsel filed a cooperation agreement that told investigators, among other things, the identity of 3 additional members of the network that Aldermore Group had constructed across the county. Danny Rourke received a reduced sentence in exchange for complete cooperation. He was 26 years old and had gotten into something he'd understood abstractly as wrong and had not, until the morning Emma walked into the building, understood as something that could end. He gave investigators everything: the routing architecture, the communication logs, the timeline of transfers going back to the beginning. His testimony was the structural spine of the Aldermore case. Lena Hargrove was arrested at her office in the state capitol 11 days after Emma walked into Redwood Valley Police Headquarters. The arrest was not dramatic. She came out with her attorney and did not look at the cameras. She was 57 years old and had built something sophisticated and patient and predatory over the course of several years. And it came apart not because of a single dramatic moment, but because a nurse in blue scrubs had read a mileage reimbursement log and recognized a pattern. Agent Ferris entered a plea agreement that implicated 2 additional individuals in the Aldermore network and resulted in her removal from federal service. She was 36 years old. Emma thought about her sometimes, not with sympathy exactly, but with the recognition that people who ended up in the positions Ferris had occupied were rarely people who'd started there intentionally. That recognition didn't change the accounting, it just made the accounting more complete. Officer Ruiz gave a formal statement that ran to 47 pages and covered 2 years of observations she'd made and not reported, things she'd seen and told herself were above her pay grade and her rank to address. The investigators who processed her statement noted that it was unusually specific and self-implicating. She didn't minimize her own inaction, didn't soften the edges. She said what she'd seen, and she said what she'd done with it, which was nothing, and she said that too. She was not charged. She was referred to a departmental review board, and the outcome of that review was that she remained on the force under a monitoring period, assigned to a unit that had been stood up specifically to implement the accountability reforms that came out of the federal investigation. Whether that was the right outcome was a question that didn't have a clean answer. Emma didn't think it was supposed to. Delamarche gave her full testimony, including the additional information she'd been holding. It filled 3 gaps in the Sutton case that had kept it from proceeding to trial. Gerald Sutton's civil rights suit moved forward with the recovered evidence and Marsh's testimony and a department that was, now, under federal oversight and structurally incapable of making evidence disappear the way it had before. The suit did not resolve quickly. Suits like that didn't. But it moved, which was the thing it had not been doing. Carla Devers, whose intake file had started all of it, was contacted by the Federal Victim Coordination Office 6 weeks after the arrests. She was 41 years old and had filed her complaint 14 months ago and had spent the intervening time watching it go nowhere, slowly understanding that the system she'd trusted was not going to move. When the coordination officer called her, she was at work. She stepped outside to take the call and stood in a parking lot in the November cold and listened to someone tell her that her complaint was being formally reopened, that the individuals responsible for its burial had been charged, that she was going to be assigned a victim's advocate who would walk her through the process. She said, according to the coordination officer's notes, one sentence before she had to stop and collect herself. She said, I didn't think anyone was actually listening. Emma went back to Crestline the next morning. She went back the morning after that too, and the one after that, because that was how shifts worked. The ER was what it always was, loud, unpredictable, moving at a pace that didn't accommodate reflection, stocked with people having the worst days of their lives, and needing someone to be calm and competent and present while they had them. She was good at that. She had always been good at that, long before nursing, in environments where the work was similar even when the context was not. The ability to stand in the middle of chaos and think clearly was not something she'd been born with. It was something she'd built, over years, in rooms that required it, through failures she'd learned from and wouldn't discuss casually. Her shoulder healed in 2 weeks. The tear in the scrub collar, she threw the shirt away because it had been a cheap set and the lanyard had worn the fabric anyway. She called her shift supervisor at Crestline 3 weeks after the arrests and told her she'd be taking 2 weeks of leave in January, which she'd earned and never used. Her supervisor, who had a quality of unsurprisedness that Emma appreciated, said that was fine, asked if everything was okay, accepted Emma's confirmation that it was with the efficiency of a woman who understood that not everything was going to be explained. She used the 2 weeks to complete a federal consulting report on the medical response integration failures that had become visible through the investigation, not the corruption itself, but the procedural gaps that had allowed witness vulnerability to go unaddressed, the specific moments where a medical advocate in the chain might have changed the trajectory for people whose complaints disappeared. It was 70 pages long and specific and probably not going to be read by the people it would most help. But she wrote it anyway because not writing it would have been a failure she wasn't willing to carry. She sent it to Tate with a cover note that was 2 sentences. He responded the same day. The response was 4 sentences. The last one said the consulting report was being forwarded to the Federal Medical Advisory Committee and that her name was on it as author, not as a confidential source. She looked at that for a moment. Her name, attached to work that was real, in a format that existed in the permanent record. It was a small thing in the context of everything. It was not a small thing. She put her phone down and looked at her apartment, which was ordinary and slightly cluttered, and contained a coffee maker that she used every morning with the knowledge that she'd let it get cold every day and hadn't yet changed that habit. She was not the same person who had walked into Redwood Valley Police Headquarters 6 weeks ago, not exactly. But she wasn't different in the way that people sometimes imagined heroism changed people, clean, completed, resolved. She was different in the accumulated way that people were different when they'd done something difficult, and it had asked everything of them, and they'd had enough to give. She still had the thing in her chest that activated when she saw the shape of an injustice, the pattern recognition that wouldn't turn off, the specific restlessness of a person who understood how systems failed and couldn't pretend otherwise. She still woke up at 5 on her days off, not from a nightmare, but from the internal clock of someone who'd spent years in environments where 5 a.m. was when things started. She still couldn't walk past a pattern without seeing it. She thought about Carla Devers standing in a parking lot in the cold, saying, I didn't think anyone was actually listening. The truth was that being heard was not, in itself, enough. Listening without action was a form of theater. What mattered was what you did after you heard. Whether you sat with the knowledge and found reasons to let it rest, or whether you picked it up and carried it somewhere it could change the shape of things. She had a shift at 6 a.m. She set her phone down and went to make coffee and thought about what it meant to carry something. Not the weight of it, but the opposite of the weight, the way it held you up when you otherwise might not hold. She had learned, in the years before nursing and during it and after the morning that was already beginning to recede into the past where difficult mornings went, that the question was never whether you had the authority to act. Authority was a costume. People put it on and took it off. Institutions conferred it and withdrew it, and it meant different things in different rooms. The question was whether you had the capacity, the skill and the knowledge and the willingness to be dismissed, underestimated, reduced to a uniform and a lanyard and a cold cup of coffee, and to stand steady in that dismissal and do the work anyway. The work did not care who you were in the eyes of the person who tore your document in half. It did not care about the voice that dripped contempt around the word nurse like the word was small. The work was the work. The evidence was the evidence. The pattern was the pattern, patient and indifferent, waiting for whoever was paying enough attention to see it. She poured the coffee. Outside, Redwood Valley was beginning to wake up. The sound of it coming through the window she'd left cracked, traffic and wind, and the particular ambience of a city that did not know, and would not know, most of what had happened inside one of its buildings on a Tuesday in November. That was fine. Cities did not need to know everything that was done on their behalf. They needed the things that were done to actually be done. She stood at the window for a moment with her coffee, and the coffee was hot because she'd just made it, and she drank it before it could get cold, which was an improvement. She thought about what Tate had said, about people who would want to talk to her, about future work. She wasn't going to be a nurse forever. She'd known that for a while without saying it plainly, the way you knew things that weren't ready to be spoken. But she was a nurse now, today, for the 6 a.m. shift that was in 4 hours, and the ER would be loud, and someone would be having their worst day, and they would need someone steady. She was good at steady. She had built it in the hardest ways a person could build something, not from certainty, but from the decision to keep moving in the absence of certainty, to do the work without the guarantee that the work would matter, to stand in a lobby in blue scrubs in front of a man who found her contemptible and press a button and trust that what was outside the building was worth the risk of what was inside it. It had been worth it. Not perfectly, not smoothly, not without the bruised shoulder and the 4-hour debrief and the 2 weeks of leave she'd needed and the 70-page report that may or may not reach the people who needed it. Worth it like real things were worth it, incompletely, imperfectly, with the awareness that it was one piece of a larger thing that would require more people doing more work in more rooms, and that justice, real justice, not the performance of it, was not an arrival but a direction. She finished her coffee. She set the mug in the sink, picked up her work bag, checked her ID badge, and walked out of her apartment into the early morning. The city was cold, and the sky was beginning to lighten at its edges, and somewhere across town, a woman named Carla Devers was getting up to go to work, still waiting for a process that moved slower than anyone wanted, but was now, finally, moving. Emma walked to her car. She had a shift